Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
We've been gone for quite a while, as some of you have noticed. That is mainly because I had a birthday. I just love to live and learn.
Tom, I'll tell you who hasn't been doing much learning is Prince Edward and Sophie Wessex.
Despite the fact that ahead of this Caribbean tour, which we're going to get into now, we had been promised that they were going to take lessons from the Cambridge Caribbean Disaster Tour.
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since the Sophie and Edward tour, but I know you guys have just been dying to hear more about it. So we're going to start off talking about the tour, and then a little bit later we're going to get deep into Tina Brown's new book, The Palace Papers.
Yeah, so we'll put a timestamp in the show notes in case you are just here for Tina.
But I don't think that's our Airhead listeners, because I know we've got a lot of eager Wessex watchers out there. So, yes, as we had said on our last episode, I think, there was that report in the Telegraph that said that palace officials had been carefully studying Sophie and Edward's itinerary to avoid further PR pitfalls. The Wessex's trip was already set to be significantly lower key than Will and Kate's.
There's not really much they can do about that, given that far less people know who they are.
And I think some people were sort of wondering, like, why weren't more media reporting on this? And part of the reason for that is that they invited fewer reporters to join them on the tour, and they also kept a lot of the details of the itinerary tightly under wraps until the very last moment, which made it more difficult to cover.
But the initial plan had been to visit Grenada, Saint Lucia, St Vincent and the Grenadines, and Antigua and Barbuda over the course of a week-long trip. And it got off, quite like the Cambridges, to a disastrous start.
Before it even started, they cancelled one of the stops, the Grenada visit. And the Telegraph reported that the Wessexes had postponed the visit after taking advice from the government of Grenada and the Governor-General, amid fears it would be overshadowed by other topics such as republicanism and slavery reparations. Royal aides offered no official explanation as to why the trip would no longer happen, but Buckingham Palace said the couple hoped to visit at a later date instead, when nobody's talking about.
Yeah, do they think that like everyone will just move on and get over it? Like such a stupid frame of mind.
I don't think they're ever going to Grenada. No. Ever.
Arlie Gill, the chairman of the Grenada National Reparations Committee, said, "We wrote to the Queen's Viceroy in Grenada, the Governor-General, asking for an audience with him. We have not heard back yet. We want to discuss the subject of reparations. We wanted the royal couple to go back to the Queen and to let her know that Grenada is owed reparations by her family and Great Britain. They need to be aware that we want reparations for all that they have done in the past."
Yeah, and he also called Sophie and Edward British oligarchs and said, "In a way, we are a bit disappointed that they're not coming, so we're not able to have that conversation with them."
You see, Sophie and Edward, people do want you to be there. It is really good, I think, in this that they point out, just remind everyone that specifically the royal family owes money as part of these reparations. I thought that was an important point.
And the whole job of Sophie and Edward is to represent the monarchy. So if people can't have that conversation with the Queen, then they are going to want to have the conversation with her representatives, Sophie and Edward. That's what you're bloody there to do.
That's what we're paying you to do.
But anyway, so it got off to a rather cowardly start, I would say. Then also, a few hours before the trip started, the Antigua and Barbuda Reparations Support Commission wrote an open letter criticising the royal family for their past comments on slavery. And this letter was just sensational. It said, "It has become common for members of the royal family and representatives of the government of Britain to come to this region and lament that slavery was an appalling atrocity, that it was abhorrent, that it should not have happened. We hear the phony sanctimony of those who came before you that these crimes are a stain on your history. For us, they're the source of genocide and continuing deep international injury, injustice and racism. We hope you will respect us by not repeating the mantra, we are not simpletons."
Amazing.
Just incredible.
Yeah, such a great letter. Dorbrino Mard, who chairs the Antigua and Barbuda Reparations Support Commission, claimed that the cancellation of the Grenada leg of the tour was because of recent revelations that the Bank of England owned 599 slaves from Grenada back in the late 18th century. So it's like, these ideas are not abstract. They shouldn't be abstract for anyone. Like, we can see the lists of who was owned by institutions in the UK, and it's very, very real. It should be real for all of us, but it's particularly a very real issue in the Caribbean. And if the monarchy and their representatives would rather just like skip over stops where they have to have what they see as uncomfortable conversations, it's like absolutely fucked and incredibly embarrassing, I think, for the UK.
I know, especially because it seems as if the Cambridge's tour was a sort of warm-up tour, and it encouraged all of these other nations to speak out and to come out quite strongly ahead of this royal visit. And it's crazy to me that, you know, Edward and Sophie are older than Will and Kate. They have been doing this royal work for longer.
Yeah.
They're not more senior in the line of succession or anything, but they should be more experienced enough to handle these kind of conversations.
Sophie worked in PR for Mr. Blobby.
But Prince Edward is the Queen's son, you know? It's not like it's the Duke of Kent or some random cousin or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, he should be equipped to deal with this kind of stuff, and the fact that they just sort of cower away from it, even after watching all of the fallout from the Cambridge tour, is extremely revealing. So anyway, the tour eventually did start on a Friday, and I think we can just sort of go day by day here. They didn't do a whole lot, but it's very interesting what unfolded on each day, because it began in Saint Lucia, where Sophie and Edward gave the Prime Minister a signed photo of themselves. I'm so sorry I couldn't get you one for your birthday, Tom.
I'm sure if you write to Saint Lucia, they'll probably send it over. This is like a long-held royal custom, apparently, giving this kind of thing. But it is like a really odd move, I think. Especially
if the purpose of your trip is to downplay the sort of imperial overtones. It was an unusual move, and the pictures of the Prime Minister receiving the framed picture are so funny.
He is like Fleabag straight to camera. Like, what's going on with this?
Then on Saturday, Edward and Sophie went to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where they were met with protests. It was admittedly quite a small group, approximately 15 protesters, but they were holding banners such as "End to Colonialism" and "Britain, your debt is outstanding."
Yeah, and I mean, when you compare it, there was a larger crowd of people welcoming them, which was made up of scouts, Girl Guides, dancers, and like people waving flags and things, the kind of stuff that you expect from like royal photo ops from this. But it's important to note that there were like two sides of this.
Yeah, especially because this was a sort of pattern throughout the tour, that even though the groups were small, they were persistent.
Yeah.
That there were multiple protests on this tour in different countries.
They met with students, some organisations for people with disabilities, women's groups, and athletes training for the Commonwealth Games. And then, of course, they planted a tree for the Jubilee in the botanical gardens there.
I thought that was interesting because, I mean, I don't know if they made changes to the itinerary or anything, but it definitely seemed very different from the Will and Kate tour. I think part of that is that people are going to be more excited to see Will and Kate, so you are going to have more walkabouts, more kind of celebrity style meet and greet almost kind of things. And then as well as that, the more fun holiday photo op type stuff.
Yeah.
There was less of that, I felt. Although my favourite photo op was, so when they went to plant the Jubilee tree, it was in the botanical gardens, and while they were there, Sophie was invited to the aviary to see the national bird.
The Amazona gildingi, which is a sort of parrot.
The bird swooped down on Sophie's head and nearly knocked her sunglasses off.
Incredible images.
I know, just so loaded with meaning,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah.
I love it. It was so funny. Okay, Sunday.
Yeah, so this was a fairly quiet day. They were in Saint Lucia visiting a monument for a Nobel laureate, and they did a church service. Although one of the country's leading radio broadcasters, Sam Flood, criticised them and their presence there. He said, "What is the purpose of this trip to Saint Lucia? How are Saint Lucia and its people benefiting from this trip? What have we done to deserve this trip? I would like to know who is benefiting from this royal visit. Who really are these royals and what is their significance? It is not like they are quite high up in the royal family. Who are they and what will they bring to the island that will benefit us as a people?"
Pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good take on the situation, although we should note that I think this guy Sam Flood is kind of controversial. I couldn't quite work out what it was. Like, he seems to have a sort of long-running feud with the local Labour Party, and he was also involved in a defamation suit after, on his show, he accused a policeman of murdering his wife, despite him having been like cleared of charges and stuff. So basically too much to unpack there for me to come down on what kind of controversy surrounding this guy. But I really like this quote from him.
Who are they?
Yeah.
Monday then, Sophie and Edward went to Antigua and Barbuda, where the Prime Minister asked them to make use of their diplomatic influence to bring about financial compensation for slavery. I think this was the most widely covered moment of the tour, and it was very interesting.
Yeah, so his name is Gaston Brown, and he told them that his country would one day become a republic, but conceded it is not on the cards currently. He said he understood that the royal family did not get involved in contentious topics, but argued that he wanted them to understand these issues so you can use your diplomatic influence in achieving the reparatory justice that we seek. And Edward's response to this, I mean, like, if you're one of those monarchists who's saying, well, the great thing about the royals is you have all these people who are trained from birth to be master diplomats, like, you must have just seen this and been, like, hanging your head in shame, because his response to this was a sort of awkward laugh, and then he sort of shifted a bit nervously in his seat and jokingly, apparently, said, I wasn't keeping notes, so I'm not going to give you a complete riposte.
Yeah, the Evening Standard reported, the Prime Minister did not laugh at the comment. It was excruciating, honestly, because the Gaston Brown had pointed out that Sophie and Edward wouldn't have seen any protests because they decided not to have these demonstrations in order to have an open and very objective discussion.
Yeah.
And it's just extremely disrespectful.
Oh, massively, yeah. I mean, once again, we said this about the Cambridge tour, that it seems to have totally slipped the royals' mind that they're there to honour their host countries.
I do think, though, like, because we talked about the moment where something similar happened on the Cambridge tour, and when they were, I don't know if confronted is the right word, but when they were addressed by a Prime Minister saying a similar thing, that Will sort of just nodded his head. Yeah. I mean, he didn't laugh or try to make a joke about it.
Yeah.
That's just such an appalling thing to do, I think. It's just incredibly unprofessional.
Yeah, and like shows that even Will, who had things like that outburst, we're very much not a racist family, he has more media training than Edward does.
Yeah, or it's not even media training. It's just how to talk to people.
That's true, yeah.
In a professional context. Like, Graham Smith of Republic said to PA, Prince Edward's tour is almost as disastrous as William's, showing he's as out of touch and tone deaf as his nephew. His complete disinterest in the very serious issues of colonial legacy and repatriations is an insult to Britain as much as it is to his Caribbean hosts. It's time the Commonwealth ended its ties with the British monarchy, and in the interest of British diplomacy, it's time we stopped sending royals overseas on official engagements. Clearly, they're neither up to the task nor interested in engaging sincerely with those they visit.
Yeah, very good point. Quite apart from everything else, these people are meant to be representing me. Like, and I am mortified every time they open their mouths, or even don't open their mouths. Just the look on their face is enough to like send you into a shame spiral. But it's okay, because later on in the day, Sophie played the steel drums, and they spoke to like a number of local craftspeople and creatives and community groups, and they met with some cricketers. So that's normally quite safe ground, I guess, for royals, is to do like sport-related things.
Yeah. Then Tuesday in Saint Lucia, they inspected medals and met military veterans. I thought this was so funny. One of them asked Edward for his name.
Funny in itself. So funny. Who are you?
And then he laughed and replied, Prince Edward. What an obnoxious response.
Such a prick. Amazing. They did their first kind of walkabout of the tour, which was in the town of Soufrière, where they received arguably the warmest welcome of the tour, according to the Evening Standard. And part of this, though, Edward spoke to a road sweeper who had a broom, and he was standing in front of a small crowd of black people, and Edward joked, I hope you keep this lot in order, while pretending to wave the broom. And it's just God. Fucking hell, like, Prince Philip is alive and well. You know, like, what the fuck? But they were also met by a group of 10 protesters before they had a trip to a cocoa plantation. And this group were displaying banners that read, repatriation with reparations and Queen say sorry. She's got a lot to apologise for.
Yeah. I mean, by the end of the trip on Thursday, 6 of the 14 countries beyond the UK that have the Queen as head of state had indicated they want to remove her.
That's just a phenomenal number. That's almost half of the realms. And there are other countries in that list that are like very Republican leaning at the moment as well. So it's not looking good for the royals.
Yeah, and of that 6, so that's Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Belize, Grenada, Jamaica, and St. Kitts and Nevis. That's 3 more than when this tour began.
Yeah.
Which is actually worse than the Cambridge tour.
Yeah, so you would kind of take from that it's not just about Will and Kate's tour being poorly planned. Like, there is a much wider pattern here that the royals actually have to address rather than sort of skirting around it, or else they'll never be able to go to any of these countries again, which is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think so too. And Peter Hunt, who's a former BBC royal editor, who is always a great commentator, he said the Caribbean visits showed the royals behaving as they always do, but the world has moved on in the wake of the Windrush scandal and Black Lives Matter. Any future trips would be unwise, as the role of Britain and the monarchy in the slave trade would feature, and the royals appear ill-equipped to rise to the occasion. And that's putting it politely.
Yeah, that's a very polite way of putting it. Like, they just have no clue and no inclination or desire to engage with these topics at all.
And it's hugely embarrassing.
Yeah, and it's absolutely not something that they can just keep ignoring.
The frustrating thing is that there wasn't huge attention paid to this tour because people don't really care about Sophie and Edward as much as they've been trying to make us care about. Trying to make Sophie and Edward happen. They're not happening. And I think if this response that we discussed of him laughing and making the shit joke had been Will or Charles, there'd be huge upset about it. Whereas he kind of gets away with it.
I've been kind of like constantly thinking in my mind about this. What would have happened if this tour had been first, like before the Cambridge one? Like, would they have just cancelled the Cambridge tour? Would they have just tried to row back entirely? Because, like, yeah, this is obviously showing them that they are not equipped to do this kind of work.
Exactly. And I know we had said we were going to pay attention to what Sophie was wearing. So I honestly felt like if they said that they were going to take lessons from the Cambridge tour, we would have seen at least a couple of fucking clutch bags, earrings, the kind of stuff even Kate
threw
did.
in.
Yeah,
at the last minute. But we also said it's going to be interesting to see what lessons they thought were important to learn. And clearly the wardrobe was not something they thought was important.
Yeah, because she did, you know, the Telegraph had a piece on Sophie's outfits, and the context of the piece was that her outfits from the tour would be great for summer weddings. And they talked about how her wardrobe focused on independent British brands. So things like Me&M, Penelope Chilvers, Solar London, Susanna, Geneva Heritage, all British brands.
Yeah.
And her only possible nod to the host nations that she was visiting, from what I could see, what mentioned in this piece, was a £795 gold pendant by a London jeweller, Cassandra Goad, engraved with a Bob Marley quote, "Love the life you live the life you love."
My God, this was so funny to me.
Oh my God.
Like, this kind of posh white British fascination with Jamaican culture is so funny and so embarrassing to me. Like, it really like resonates from like my own school years, people I was at school with, and the posters, and it really like reminds us of something we read, and we're going to get onto the Palace Papers now, but something we read in that, which is apparently when he was 17 years old, Will had a poster on his wall at school of a spaced out Rastafarian flying through the clouds with a spliff in his mouth, coupled with the slogan, "Don't drink and drive, have a smoke and fly."
Oh my God.
And I'm like, is Sophie just doing like an adult version of that?
No, but I do think it is absolutely pathetic, if that's even what this necklace was intended to be.
Yeah, if that's the only nod to any kind of like Caribbean influence or design, it's very embarrassing. But we should now move on to our long-promised book club. We are talking about The Palace Papers by Tina Brown.
You guys probably have heard us talk about Tina Brown many times. We did a book club on the Diana Chronicles last summer, I
Yeah.
think. So we'll start with Tina. Who is Tina?
So she's like one of the biggest journalists the UK has produced. She was editor-in-chief of Tatler magazine, she edited Vanity Fair, she edited The New Yorker, and she was founding editor-in-chief of The Daily Beast. And that's just to name like a few of the things she's done. She's also done like talk shows and all sorts.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there can be a tendency in royal watching circles to dismiss her as another member of the royal rota, with an agenda, but I would really emphasize that her work is so different. She is one of the most brilliant journalists. I love her books. I've read all of them. I think, you know, even when you don't agree with her, the amount of work that she puts into them and her writing, everything about them is incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
So I would really warn people against dismissing her because they've read a couple of lines out of context.
Definitely. And like she's so funny as well about the royals, which is something which really I think appeals to like both of us about her work, because that's why we started the podcast, is because we found so much of what the royals do and who they are very funny.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that we think she's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we don't agree with everything that she says. Like, I definitely get the feeling she is probably a monarchist at heart, which is not the same
Yeah,
as
and
us.
coming from that Tatler background, she is very upper class. She will say things like, Will lying about having COVID is endearing the old school, things like that are not endearing to me. And also, we should note, we went to see Tina speak about this book last week with Pandora Sykes. And so we will be largely talking about the book, but some things as well will be things that she said at that talk about the book.
And she was talking, when we saw her, about like what she thinks this book is about and like what was the driving force behind writing this book. And she said it's about how the monarchy recovered from the Diana years and the aftermath of her death, and it's how they kind of rebuilt the brand royal, but then also how it's suffered in the last couple of years as well.
As we talked about on the Diana Chronicles episode, after Diana's death, the British public really turned against the royals, especially the Queen, because they felt that she wasn't emoting in the way that they wanted her to, and they demanded that she return to London to pay her respects. But as Tina Brown charts in this book, by the time of the Golden Jubilee, which was in 2002, only 5 years later, the public opinion had changed enough for there to be this huge concert at Buckingham Palace in her honour, all these other Jubilee events, and then 10 years after that, 2012, the Queen really won everyone over with the James Bond Olympic Games skydiving stunt. And all of this, Tina Brown explains, is part of what she calls the golden years period for the royals, which is roughly 2011 to 2019.
Yeah, so it's like a period of time when public opinion was high for pretty much all of the royals, and they seem to have built back a lot of what they had lost reputationally in the 90s. Like, things kind of came together. Like, Charles's interest in what had previously been seen as kind of esoteric or niche causes really paid off, because a lot of people now thought of him as kind of ahead of his time in terms of what he said about environmentalism and things like that. And even though Camilla has like never been very popular, like in the rankings of popularity with the royals, at that point it was generally thought that she was kind of good for Charles and that they were happy together. And then you had the young royals, Will, Kate and Harry, being these kind of like stars on the rise as well.
Yeah, so there was a lot of excitement about them with these fresh modern causes, sort of reminiscent of Diana with the mental health and all that kind of stuff. And then as well, Meghan coming in like a breath of fresh air, broadening the appeal of the royals to a wider demographic. And then after this quite successful Diamond Jubilee in 2012, the Queen became what Tina describes as a sort of pop culture heroine after the James Bond skydiving stunt at the opening of the Olympic Games that year.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we're talking about this golden years period, we should just be clear, we haven't like lost the run of ourselves. We still have all of our anti-monarchist beliefs. What we're talking about here, and what Tina is talking about too, is the perception of the royals and the story that was being told by them and the press, and the kind of collaboration between the royals and the press.
Yeah, but it's now been 10 years since that Jubilee. We've got the other Jubilee coming, and the royals are in disarray yet again. Yeah,
and, you know, it's in some ways inevitable, because even with these kind of like good things that were part of the golden years, there are problems that underlie them. Like, we know that there are big problems with Charles's approach to environmentalism, for example, and we know that even before Meghan was on the scene, there were signs of a rift growing between Will and Harry that was, a direct result of the way the heir and the spare are treated differently. But yeah, now, certainly the last 2 years seem to have been kind of cataclysmic for royal reputation.
Yeah, and Tom and I have this sort of theory because Tina says that she agreed to do this book in the summer of 2019, which is still within that golden years period before the Sussexes announced that they would be stepping down and before Andrew's Newsnight interview. So I have a feeling that the original idea was to explore how the royals had reached this new golden era, which was still going on at the time that she agreed to do the book. And I guess she didn't see the Sussex and the Andrew meltdown coming.
Yeah.
Because then all of this happened and she really had to change focus.
Yeah, she looks at the two big scandals: Andrew's relationship with Epstein and Virginia Roberts' lawsuits, and then also Harry and Meghan's move away from working royal life. And she sees them as two very different situations that nevertheless have both had a huge negative impact on the last few years of the Queen's reign.
Yeah, and the book charts all of this with a specific focus on the 4 royal women who are on the cover. So you have Camilla, Kate, Meghan and the Queen. And we obviously do hear a lot about all of the other players too, particularly Andrew, but the book is largely structured around getting to know these women. So I thought maybe that would be the best way for us to talk about it, which means we get to start with Camilla.
Yes. I mean, I found it really refreshing to read. I guess I haven't read as much about Camilla as I would like, but the overwhelming stuff you see online is people being so negative about her. And so I enjoyed reading someone who clearly had a soft spot for her and talked about her with a kind of a fondness and a humour and without deference as well.
Yeah, and she is really in her element talking about Camilla, probably because they moved in some of the same circles. But she obviously loves Camilla's laid-back, borderline lazy personality, her sense of humour, and, of course, her sexuality.
Which she never, ever forgets. She has this great line: Camilla has always been sexual and emotional comfort food for the Prince of Wales. Oh my god. But I mean, obviously because this sort of royal horniness between Charles and Camilla is royal, there has to be something that's kind of weird about it. And in this case, I was so delighted because it's Charles's obsession with his grandmother. So that's the Queen Mother, who apparently was a bit of a glam party girl, and Charles tried to model Camilla after her.
Yeah, her getting all of Queen Mother's jewels and Charles dressing her up in the Queen Mother's jewels and stuff. But Tina says, in a way, Camilla subsumed the role played in Charles's life by the Queen Mother. The woman who always made him the centre of her world, the buttery scone to his mother's steamed broccoli. What an amazing way of putting it.
Absolutely incredible. She also notes that Charles would greet his grandmother by kissing her all the way up her arms.
Such a weird move.
Yeah.
Posh people are so weird. Charles obviously really into Camilla, as we all know. We talked about this in the Diana Chronicles episode as well. And Tina has loads of mentions of Camilla's thighs encased in jodhpurs, and she calls her riding boots dominatrix boots.
So funny.
But I think it was really good how she touched on the way a large part of the public and the press, that their dislike of Camilla was rooted in how she looked.
Yeah.
And that she was the opposite of what people thought a royal mistress or a trophy wife should look like. She has a sort of list where she says Camilla's offence perhaps was to overthrow the sexist magazine nostrums of what a mistress ought to look like. The tabloids expended an endless volley of creative insults in her direction. Old boiler, old trout, old bag, prune, hatchet face, horse face, fat, gaunt, weather-beaten, witch, vampire, frump.
They're so extreme. And all this kind of language kind of culminated in a dish that was named after Camilla by a restaurant in St. James's. This is the only dish named after Camilla, according to Tina Brown. It's smoked haddock Parker bowls.
Oh, it's just the least glamorous dish you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. I mean, it's always struck me, though, that, the hatred level at Camilla, and we see it, like I said, like we see it online in our own Instagram comments and stuff. People just like commenting vomit emojis whenever we put up a picture of Camilla, and we have to like spend ages deleting them. But it's as though the world somehow decided that Camilla is the last woman whose appearance is like totally fair game. And I think whatever you think of the Diana situation, it just doesn't sit right with me that people feel like they have carte blanche to really go after her in a very personal, appearance-based way.
Exactly. One story that I hadn't heard about Camilla before that's mentioned in this book is that she was involved in a car accident in 1997 where she took off from the scene to get a better signal on higher ground to call Charles.
It's never like a good look to leave the scene for, I guess, any reason, but she left the other driver, Carolyn Melville Smith, trapped upside down in her car because her skirt was shut in the door, and this woman, Carolyn, suffered chest injuries as a result of the accident. But according to Carolyn, Camilla had appeared like a missile. And I can really believe that, given what we know about other royals and their driving styles.
Yeah, when she talks about Philip, she calls him a demon driver. One of the big questions that fascinates her is why these women married into the royal family.
Yeah.
Because it becomes increasingly apparent, I mean, it was always apparent to us, but over the course of the book, love cannot be enough for this kind of lifestyle. It's so prescriptive, and the men are awful.
Yeah, they're so awful. And, I mean, that doesn't mean that love isn't a part of it. And I think Tina goes as far as to say that marital love is the most powerful survival element of the monarchy. And she does emphasise the different strengths of each of these marriages. Clearly, in Charles and Camilla's case, they are so mind-blowingly horny for each other. And in addition to that, like, not only does Camilla have a sort of superhuman patience to put up with Charles's constant complaining about things, but also loves him enough to actually care about his happiness.
Yeah, and she does have a quote from someone who's like, she stops him from doing the pompous thing when he like wants them to bring out his pre-mixed gin and tonic. She's like, oh my god, stop, I'll just do it. Like, chill out. So she can sort of deflate him in that way. But another reason as to why they got married may have been the fact that she was £160,000 in debt after her divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles.
Amazing how in debt you can get when you're so rich. Like,
it's stunning.
But I mean, there are other factors too. Like, it sounded pretty grim, the whole situation of being like with Charles but not engaged or married.
She was pretty much publicly shunned.
Yeah.
Especially because they had all the same friends, but she wouldn't be invited to things by the Queen, or she wasn't allowed to sit next to Charles when they went to things, or if she was invited to something, she'd be humiliated by being placed at the back, as far away from Charles as possible. But Tina does still emphasise that the role of royal mistress is probably a lot more fun and a lot more Camilla than the role of royal wife.
Yeah, like once they got married, like we hear so much about the very boring work that the royal family do in this book.
Yeah, and like how having a diary full of things that you didn't want to do is essentially what royal life is, and the last thing Camilla would want.
Yeah, and like, you know, on the flip side of that, you have apparently the Queen's total enthusiasm for this kind of absolutely mind-numbing, boring work. And it sounds like worlds away from Camilla's like boozy house parties or her like cozy nights in with her kids and grandkids.
I thought the stuff about her kids was really interesting. I'd never really thought about how their kids interact with the royals before. We've talked about Tom Parker Bowles fairly recently because of his alleged involvement in the cash for access scandal surrounding Charles. But in this book, we learn that he was thought by some people in the royal circle to be a bad influence on Harry after he was arrested for possession of ecstasy and weed in a club in 1995, for example, and various other incidents. Yeah. And that Camilla's daughter, Laura, was feuding with Will because each of them blamed the other's parent for disrupting their family lives. And a family friend told the Sunday Express, William would blame Camilla for all the hurt she had caused his mother, which would send Laura into a rage. Laura was not having any of it. She would take a hard line and fire back at William, your father has ruined my life.
It's very, like, refreshing to hear someone talk about Charles like that, I think. And, like, you know, me, I much prefer Charles to take the blame for it than Camilla.
Yeah, I can imagine the pain of having what feels like the whole country or even the whole world hating your mother.
Yeah.
When you're saying, what about Charles?
Yeah. Of course, Tina Brown spends quite a lot of time talking about the wedding of Charles and Camilla.
I loved this bit.
Yeah.
I'd never really read all that much about the wedding. I feel like we talked about it on an episode before, but when she lays out the pattern of the disasters leading up to Charles and Camilla's wedding, which was a very long time coming.
Yeah, Charles kept putting it off, sort of making excuses like he was trying to rehab Camilla's image, or it wasn't the right time. We needed to, like, you know, pick it very carefully and stuff. But, like, it worked to an extent because, like we said, she did gain, like, more acceptance from the British public. And by the time, you know, in 2004, more members of the public, according to a poll, supported Charles and Camilla getting married than opposed it. And even more than that, said they didn't care either way, which I think is, like, actually a really key demographic for the royals. Like, they probably want quite a lot of people to not care about what they do either way.
Yeah. And once the wedding was set, the journey to the altar was terribly bumpy. Because first off, Connaught House announced that Charles and Camilla would have a civil marriage in Windsor Castle, only it didn't have a licence. So if Windsor Castle was furnished with a licence, then any member of the public could apply to be married there, which they didn't want. So Charles and Camilla had to switch the venue to the Guildhall, which is also in Windsor, but significantly less glamorous. And then the Queen felt that because of her position as head of the church, that didn't permit her to attend a civil ceremony, which then also raised questions about the legality of the ceremony. Was the Queen shunning the ceremony? All of this kind of stuff.
Then you had Charles getting caught calling Nicholas Witchell an awful man on a hot mic when he was on holiday in Closters.
Yeah, the reporter.
Which, you know, that's just kind of like an upset entirely of Charles's own making.
Oh, yeah.
But one that wasn't was the Pope's death and the Queen ordering Charles to go to the Pope's funeral, which was on the same day that he had been scheduled to be married to Camilla.
And then they had to postpone the wedding, at which point it was clashing with the Grand National, which itself had to be delayed 30 minutes so that people could watch the wedding, at which the Queen did basically the bare minimum and spent the rest of her time in like a sort of offshoot room with Andrew Parker Bowles watching the race and then watching a replay of the race later. Like,
oh, I mean, imagine your mum spending your wedding day with your new wife's ex-husband.
But apparently Camilla had a total meltdown about this, and you know, she quotes like a Daily Mail headline that was like, what else could possibly go wrong? And I think, you know, Tina puts it well when she says, it must have felt as if Diana and the Queen Mother had joined forces from beyond the grave to rain down thunderbolts on her special day.
Yeah, and I thought it was so interesting what she was saying about this because, you know, the idea of Camilla reacting like this, it's so out of line with what we understand about Camilla generally. Yeah. But it's also totally understandable that she would react like this because this is like an absolute hellstorm in the lead up to it. And apparently it took 4 people to coax her out of bed on her wedding day. And imagine you've waited that long for that day, and by the time it comes, you're just like, I don't want to do this.
I know. Up next is Kate. For me, this section was quite disappointing because it felt kind of slight in comparison to the others, especially Meghan's, which we'll get onto in a minute.
Yeah.
But I think part of that is because Kate, it seems, only confides in her mother and her sister, according to Tina. So there aren't as many people to talk to about Kate. And also, Kate didn't really do as much before she got married as Meghan or Camilla did. So there's less to say about her. But, you know, we do get some insight into Kate's early life. Tina is very much of the view that Kate deliberately pursued Will. She calls it a quiet campaign, I think. And she talks about how Kate soothed Will when he was thinking of dropping out of college. She helped him to change his course to geography. She talks about the very long relationship, the breakup, Kate sort of trying to make him jealous with the clubbing and all that stuff, then them getting back together, and how their wedding was part of the golden era that had people falling back in love with the royals. But I think once she's married, Tina's big point about Kate, and one that she repeated at that talk last week, is that Kate's great achievement is retaining mystique in an age where people are always talking and oversharing.
Yeah, and this, this is Tina's way kind of saying that Kate is dull and boring.
She does say Kate is dull.
And I mean, she says that, this mystique is very similar to being dull, and that is kind of a superpower for royals. And Tina is very impressed that Kate has managed to do this in today's world, because it's so much easier for the Queen to retain that mystique. There was no social media before she became Queen, and she became Queen so young that she immediately had to close down and become this kind of blank slate.
Yeah, and I do think it's a good point that dullness is a necessary safety mechanism for the royals, but you do, or I certainly did, get the impression that Tina feels it makes for quite limited writing, and that she sort of bulks up the Kate chapters with long references to novels, to Walpole and Trollope and all this kind of stuff that I felt could quite easily have been cut out.
Yeah, and something that I thought I'm quite interested in, but that didn't really come across in the book, was the idea of dullness is quite a sinister force that can be used by the royals, because you get the impression that maybe if Kate is quite passively dull, for example, the Queen is maybe more actively weaponizing that kind of part of what she does. If you're dull, you're much less likely to be scrutinized, and it's handy if you're doing things like secretly lobbying the government to be exempted from various laws. That is a very kind of crucial, not just protective mechanism, but almost like a weapon, I think, for the royals to get to do what they do. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that applies to Kate. I think her brand of dullness or mystique is more likely a result of kind of lack of interest in things.
Yeah, and Tina does talk about her minimal career.
Yeah.
And I thought there was a fantastic detail that when Kate was kind of encouraged to get a job and she went to Jigsaw, she told her prospective boss before she was even hired that she needed an element of flexibility to continue the relationship with a very high profile man and a life that she can't dictate. She was openly rearranging her life around Will and saying her whole world was Will.
Yeah.
To such an extent that when they broke up, Jigsaw gave her compassionate leave.
Which, is bonkers. But, I mean, she does mention that, Kate would take early morning trips to art galleries and things to, after they were married and stuff, they would open places up early so that she could continue to pursue some of the things that she's interested in. So she's not saying that she doesn't have any interest in anything. And I did think it was good she noted that Kate felt she worked very hard to become a style icon.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second because she does talk about the Kate-Meghan rivalry, but I thought her bit about the rivalry between Kate and her sister Pippa could possibly shed some light on that, because a family friend says Kate was always quite jealous of Pippa. I sense that she feared being eclipsed by her because Pippa has more natural effervescence, is socially much more at ease, and was always popular with everyone, especially their brother James's friends. So later then, when Meghan was being hailed as very glamorous, Kate was apparently a bit miffed because, as you say, she felt that she had worked long and hard for this status as a style icon, that she was very diligent about wearing inexpensive clothes and recycling them, while Meghan could wear a couture dress for her engagement photo and people were happy for her to do so. But Kate was even more concerned, allegedly, about Meghan's clearly superior presentation skills. And she talks about that one event, the one Fab Four event they did together, and how Kate felt that it was a very awkward dynamic and that she was very irritated that Meghan spoke so articulately when the whole mental health campaign that the Royal Foundation was doing had been Kate's idea.
Right, yeah.
So she sort of felt like Meghan was kind of hijacking it, I guess.
Yeah.
And talking about Me Too, which wasn't an issue that had been on the agenda.
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting section because it did give us like an idea of what Kate feels about her career as a royal. I mean, not her career at Jigsaw. We know how she felt about that.
The most frustrating thing about the chapters on Kate is that I didn't feel like there was a satisfying explanation about why Kate joined the royal family.
Yeah, like it was pretty exciting, I thought, in the book when she started talking about the time that they broke up and how Kate would have been, at that point, a real catch for any normal millionaire guy, and that Will started to realise that in their time that they were apart. But there's no reason offered why Kate similarly thought that Will was the ultimate catch.
Yeah, and, he wasn't even very nice to her from some reports. Like, Tina quotes a college friend who said Will could be flip and curt with her. He expected Kate to run after him, and the longer they knew each other, the more he seemed to keep her on a tight leash. And that before they even got married, Will allegedly complained to one of his friends, "All the fun has gone. I don't want to be nailed down."
Which is, like, just such confirmation that Will is, like, the most boring, stereotypical shit bloke, like, that you could imagine. Like, he's kind of, like, just eye-rollingly boring.
The kind of guy who's going to call his wife a ball and chain.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But he'd already started to lose his looks and his hair by the time they were married. So I guess he was just trying to make the most of his own golden years, I guess. But if there's one takeaway from this book, it's that, like, love is never enough to marry one of these men. Unlike, say, Diana, who was virtually a child when she married Charles, or Meghan, who had like a relatively short relationship with Harry before they got married. Kate had been around for ages. She would have seen all the difficulties. Like, she'd already had run-ins with the press, with the public, with photographers, like, all of that by this point. I mean, I guess maybe she thought there was no more surprise left, and she had managed to navigate it successfully so far.
I think when you said there's no reason offered for why Kate chose to marry Will, I think the reason, per Tina, is because of her longing for social validation and an irrepressible desire to marry up. Kate did not wait 8 years for any rich, connected man. She waited for the man, the future king. And that in marrying Will, she was able to get back at the sort of mean girls in school who didn't think she was good enough to hang around with them. She was able to get back at the tabloids who had called her Weighty Katie. She was able to get back at the people who sneered at her mother. All of those kind of things. Which, like, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because that is probably the most critical reason you could give for Kate marrying Will, is that it's a social climbing exercise. And it's exactly the kind of narrative that they wanted to avoid with the wedding and their relationship. It was like, you didn't want it to be seen that Kate was a social climber. You wanted it to be seen that, like, the royal family is embracing the people in marrying a commoner.
We should point out that she does mention the Rose Hanbury, Marchioness of Cholmondeley affair rumours, but her take on it seems to be that there wasn't actually anything there, that it was likely gossip spread by the older generation in Norfolk whose own years of secret extramarital activities made them assume that most rumours were true.
Right, yeah.
Which surprised me because I feel like she would be very ingrained with that kind of set, and if there was anything there, that she would have heard about it. And, she does, as we'll talk about later, she does refer to Prince Philip's probable infidelities and things. She doesn't shy away from that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's what she says about Rose Hanbury, because I'm sure you guys would be interested. Now, Meghan.
Yeah, so in comparison with Kate, there's a lot about Meghan in this book, which it makes sense to me because there's so much more to know about her. Like, she had a whole life and career before moving in royal circles at all. And it's, I think, the one life in this book that hasn't been covered in this way before. Like, I started reading this book knowing that a lot of Meghan fans had kind of already taken against both Tina Brown and this book based on some of the extracts that were published in newspapers, or even just like extracts that people saw on Twitter and kind of phrases taken out of context. And I think there are definitely some phrasings in this book that could and should have been avoided.
The casting getup.
Yeah, that was a big one. But I still would say it's really worth reading the whole book.
Yeah. Because
I think Tina's put in the work to try to really understand Meghan and how she felt when she entered the royal family.
Yeah, and I mean, I know there's lots of books about Meghan. The only other one that I've read is the Andrew Morton one. And I feel like this, as Tom is saying, goes a lot further to try to understand Meghan and to present her as a fully rounded, complex person. And I think people have pointed out the difference in how Tina writes about Kate and how she writes about Meghan. And, that's definitely something I agree with and noticed when I was reading it. But there's a lot more energy in how she writes about Meghan because there's a lot more to discuss. But I think because she's not writing as a fan of any of these people, but as a journalist, as a biographer, in a way, it's not going to be as flattering as fans would like. And I don't think it's as simple as, does she like Meghan? Does she hate Meghan? Does she like Kate? Does she hate Kate? It's not about liking.
Yeah.
That's something that I really enjoyed about the book, honestly. And I think it's actually more valuable to compare how she writes about Meghan with how she writes about Diana, particularly, both in this book and in the Diana Chronicles, because she talks extensively with people around them. And she did 120 interviews for this book.
Yeah.
So she got a lot of quotes, a lot of stories from all sides.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do feel like it's a very three-dimensional portrait.
Yeah, and, in addition to Kate, I'd seen people also accusing her of being more interested in or sympathetic to Harry's ex-girlfriends Chelsea Davy and Cressida Bonus, because she does talk at length about how Chelsea was treated by the paparazzi and how Cressida got Harry to go to therapy, for example. But if you read the whole book, there's so much more about Meghan than there is about these people, and that's something that you will not get from just reading an extract. But these notes about Chelsea and Cressida actually go massively towards increasing the reader's understanding of what Meghan would go on to face.
Yeah.
And, as Tina notes, like, if it's this bad for two white women, how much worse would it be for a woman of colour?
Yeah.
Something that I loved, actually, while we're on the subject of Cressida and Chelsea, it's totally tangential, but apparently when she's embarrassed, Cressida Bonus can be heard to exclaim, "Cringe de la cringe."
Obsessed.
Absolutely obsessed. So good. So funny.
I also thought it was worth mentioning that she pointed out that Cressida didn't like Harry's lad image either, and that she was heard to say to him, "I just want you to stop being so laddish." Because I think people always talk about Meghan as having like taken all the fun out of Harry and stopped him from being that old boozing, smoking...
The bloke on a bender.
Yeah.
Tina Brown notes people loved about him.
Yeah, and people are like, oh, well, I wish he just married Cressida.
Like, Cressida also wanted him to stop doing all this shit. Like, I don't think she was particularly happy when he was, like, photographed naked in Las Vegas. You know?
Yeah. So, anyway, I just thought that was worth pointing out. But I do think Tina's book is very interesting in the insight it gives into Harry as a person, in particular his temper. I think that came across in a little bit in Finding Freedom, also in Robert Lacey's book, Battle of Brothers, but that Harry can be quite hot-headed, and Tina has quotes from friends who talk about his frequent tantrums. Apparently Cressida Bonus was either being dragged through the streets being yelled at or ignored while he threw a hissy fit.
Yeah, and there's like a lot about how, Harry's hatred of the press, which is obviously understandable up to a point, led him to treat members of the public badly. Like, there's a story about an elderly man who asked politely if he could take a photo with Harry for his sick wife, and Harry told him to get out of my way. Just like really, really bad look. And I loved actually that Tina ended her riposte to that anecdote was just cringe de la cringe.
So good.
So funny.
I think she does a good job of explaining that, like, his animosity towards the press was deeply ingrained. People always think that, Meghan came along and suddenly ruined everything, whatever.
Yeah.
But she goes to great lengths to explain how, I think she puts it like, the media had mortified Harry on front pages for every adolescent misstep, that it cut short his deployment in Afghanistan, that it destroyed his relationships with Chelsea and Cressida, that his anger towards the press was long-standing, and that it became irreversible in, I think she said it was 2009, so way before Meghan appeared.
And even, like, she gives some insight into how Will and Harry thought about the press differently because of the ages they were when Diana died.
Yes.
And that Harry had not seen the way that Diana colluded with or used the press to her advantage, or what she thought was her advantage. So his view of Diana was purely as the victim of what the press did, which is certainly an element of it, but Will had more insight into the way she had worked with them.
Yeah, I thought she put it well when she said that Will understood Diana more but idealised her less.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. But I do think she goes into detail about this sense of entitlement that is shared by basically all the royal men, but particularly Charles, Andrew, Will and Harry. Edward a bit as well, but she doesn't talk about him all that much in this book. And as I've said before, it makes me baffled as to why anybody would want to spend their lives with these men.
Yeah, like, I mean, maybe if you are posh and you move in these kind of aristocratic circles, you come to expect it, or maybe you share some of it yourself. But I really wonder how and why Meghan would put up with that kind of attitude.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like, I suppose maybe a bit surprised, but definitely delighted that so much time was devoted to Meghan's career pre-Harry. Although I don't think that, like, Sussex stans will be particularly happy with it. Like, Tina seems as interested in Meghan as a lifestyle blogger as we are. And people have definitely had a go at us in the past for referring to Meghan as a blogger.
Even calling her that.
Yeah, like, even though Meghan at one point wanted to do that full time. Like...
And I do think Tina is quite generous. Like, in another part where she talks about Meghan as an actress, she calls her B-list.
Yeah.
Which is...
maybe generous, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think in the same way that Tina, as we've spoken before, doesn't buy into the idea of Diana as someone who always operated selflessly or without an agenda, she is interested in Meghan's drive, ambition, work ethic. You know, she's not afraid to talk about Meghan having a goal and what she would do to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that's something that people sort of pick and choose. Like we've talked before about how people love that Meghan's a planner and that Meghan is really smart and strategic about things. But that can be applied in many different ways.
Yeah, there's a flip side to it, yeah.
And I think that the section, you know, she, in the acknowledgements, Tina describes herself as a long-time fan of Suits. And she goes into a lot of depth about Meghan's time on Suits. Like, she even watched Meghan's audition tapes for Suits.
Yeah.
And she talks about the ways that Meghan was both successful and at the same time frustrated. And she talks about how there's something very similar about that in Meghan and in Harry.
Yeah, she quotes a palace veteran who says that Harry is a deeply caring person who wants to make a positive difference. He doesn't understand that the reason he's getting to do that is because he's a prince. And I think, you know, there's a similarity here with Meghan. Like, she is also a caring person who wants to make a positive difference, but she does understand that you only get to do that kind of thing if you achieve, or if you have a certain level of, like, fame or attention or some other kind of draw. She understands that she has to, like, work hard to be the new Angelina Jolie, for example.
Yeah. And I definitely feel there are times that Tina goes over the top in how she describes Meghan. And we will talk about that a bit later because there are some things in the book that we wanted to mention that made us feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I didn't get the sense that she was judging Meghan's professional behaviour. I thought that was her way of showing how hard and how strategically Meghan had worked to get to where she had, and using that to help us understand how frustrating royal life must have been for her as a result.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, there's no doubt, I think, in Tina's writing that Harry and Meghan are very much in love. And she talks, like we said, about how similar their outlooks are. But in kind of looking for that extra reason why to marry a prince, she makes it clear that Meghan's career had kind of reached a sort of plateau. She had apparently sensed, like, the beginning of an end for her role in Suits. Other cast members were thinking of leaving. Patrick Adams, who played Mike, who was her, like, on-screen husband, romance fiance,
By the end,
he was like about to be written out. So she had, like, been pivoting into doing more speaking engagements for causes that she wanted to champion. But even though she was really good in the room, they weren't getting much, like, online traction, or it wasn't growing in the way that she had hoped. And I really loved reading what Tina thought of The Tig.
Yeah.
One of our favourite blogs ever. And, like, about stuff like, you know, Meghan's interest in swag bags that were sent by publicists and things like that. Like, because I feel like this side of Meghan is, like, really not embraced by her hardcore fans, who really only recognise her championing of very worthy causes and her perceived selflessness. But I love this blogger who takes herself a bit too seriously, who kind of has to navigate the kind of mid-levels of acting and Hollywood and celebrity.
Yeah, and then how frustrating that must have been for her, that she loved getting freebies, and now as a royal she was getting better and more freebies than ever, but her own staff were confiscating them from her because royals weren't meant to wear them. I can already feel, and I can tell that our inbox is going to be loaded with the anger of Sussex stans who hate the idea that Meghan might see a relationship with Harry as a good career move. But I think, you know, be realistic. Like, if you're 34 and you've had a career and you want to marry someone, but you know you're going to have to give up your career, being in love isn't enough.
Yeah.
You have to think about what is your life going to look like in this institution. And I think it's totally possible and probable that Harry and Meghan were in love and at the same time realised that the relationship could be advantageous to her.
Yeah, because like why else would a 35-year-old give up the whole career that she'd worked so hard for to join like the most archaic institution possibly in the world? It like doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But anyway, the big takeaway from her professional life was that she was used to what was essentially a meritocracy, and specifically the idea of the call sheet. So if you're more important to a show, you go higher on the call sheet and you get more staff members who are specific to you and you get more perks.
Yeah, but that's not how the royal family works, as we all know. And after Harry and Meghan did the Australia-New Zealand tour with the amazing coverage they got, there was a sense that in a normal company, you know, you'd get promoted, or in entertainment, to use Tina's metaphor, that you would move up the call sheet. But what actually happened was nothing.
Yeah.
And I think having read so much about Meghan's career at that point in the book, it prepares you to understand how weird and disappointing that would be for her. Because I was surprised to see in this book that Meghan apparently hated every second of that tour, that she found the itinerary of engagements pointless.
According to a former palace employee, she didn't understand why things were set up in that way. Instead of being excited when thousands of people showed up at the opera house, it was very much like, what's the purpose? I don't understand this. And the this in this case is the representational role of the monarchy and its very traditional agenda, rather than what she would prefer, which is the kind of causes that she wants to spotlight. And I think this is very understandable. Like, this is exactly how you would feel going into this situation, I think, especially as an American. You'd be like, so these people are just coming because they want to honour the royal family? Like, what?
But one of the things Tina explains is, like, for Diana, because obviously there was parallels drawn between the two Australian tours, and for Diana, the Australian tour, she said, helped her realise her sense of duty and what her royal role demanded. But for Meghan, Tina sees it as having made her think that the monarchy needed her more than she needed them. And I also just thought there was such nice symmetry in that chapter between Meghan being number 6 on the call sheet on Suits and Harry being 6th in line to the throne.
Yeah.
Just a nice bit of writing there. But I think in terms of the marriage between Harry and Meghan, a lot has been made about Tina's assertion that when Will suggested that Harry slow things down ahead of getting married with Meghan, that was actually Will looking out for Meghan rather than trying to protect Harry.
Yeah, I'm like slightly conflicted in how I feel about this, because I do understand the argument that Meghan would have benefited from taking time to establish a life in the UK that's separate from the palace. But this is coming from Will, the person who made Kate wait for like years and years and years to get married. So I kind of want to take his advice maybe with like a pinch of salt.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's bad advice, but I also think it's possibly rooted in some kind of bias.
Yeah.
And also possible jealousy at Harry having found someone outside of Will and Kate to spend all his time with. But apparently Harry's response to this was that, okay, I need to marry her as quickly as possible because then I can protect her.
Yeah.
Which to me is a wild response because, you know, and Tina does explain in the book that, as had happened to Camilla and to Kate, that the royal family is really reluctant to recognise royal girlfriends because they don't want to be seen as officially endorsing them before an engagement, so they don't provide them with any protection. Yeah. Which is an absolute, like, an incredibly dangerous thing to do for these women. But it means that the amount of support and protection on offer is very limited, which was very frustrating for Camilla and Kate. And presumably Harry thought that the solution to that was, okay, well, let's just get married faster.
Yeah, but this desire to do things really quickly is something that I think really links Harry and Meghan. And in some arenas, it's a real asset. Like the Invictus Games would be an example of like a real practical royal initiative where Harry saw a problem, worked on a way to help, and then launched it successfully and made a difference. Similarly, Meghan's Together cookbook and the SmartWorks project are examples of where this Sussex desire to get things done really like stepped in at the right time. I think part of this has got to be the kinds of causes that they're interested in supporting. Like, they see a lot of these issues very close up, and they understand that the longer you wait to make a change like this, the more very real harm can be done.
But Tina does note as well where the Sussexes' impatience has been a hindrance to them, particularly with regards to their plans to step back from royal duties and the website announcing that she thinks that by playing a longer game, Harry and Meghan could have got what they wanted when they stepped back. And when we saw her being interviewed, she described what they have now as being the worst of both worlds, which I thought was an interesting way to put it, because in her view, Harry and Meghan live in luxury, but their net worth is pennies compared to that of their neighbours.
Yeah.
And that they have these great Netflix and Spotify deals, but they haven't proven that they can deliver on the promises they made to those companies. And the expectations are very high. And as she put it, just because you get a first contract doesn't mean you're guaranteed a second.
Yeah, and, in the prologue of the book, Tina states that celebrities flare and burn out. The monarchy plays the long game. There's no timestamp on the public's interest in you as long as it's clear that your interest is the public's. So, this very different approach to time is so clear in the way she writes about, say, Meghan versus the Queen, for example. Meghan, like a normal person, is looking to achieve things, within her own lifetime. It's the position that a lot of us are in. She starts at the bottom and she, looks to see how far she can get. But the royals, especially those in direct line to the throne, do not start from the bottom. They start high up and they move very slowly. They're either dragging the institution along or being dragged by the institution, depending on how you view it. And their success is measured over generations, not just years.
But clearly so many things went wrong in the lead up to the Sussexes stepping back. And Tina acknowledges that many of them are because of failures within the palace. First off, none of the staff that were assigned to work with Meghan were people of colour, and her lady-in-waiting was 80 years old.
Yeah. She has a palace source who says, "We didn't take race seriously enough. There were hardly any black people that worked in the household and almost none in senior positions." But she also says they had contacts enough to ask advice from black leaders themselves, but they chose not to do so. She disagrees with this insider, saying, "We made a mistake as a household, not as a family."
Yeah, and I thought she kind of quite nicely encapsulated all the different perspectives around this. So she says, shouldn't the royals have thought to become at least passingly literate in the language of race and racism? Was it really Meghan's obligation to give tutorials on modern racial attitudes just to get on with her in-laws? At the same time, shouldn't Meghan have recognised that attitudes that had defined white privilege in a 1,000-year-old monarchy were unlikely to change overnight? And while I don't agree, I can sort of see why somebody would think that.
Yeah.
And I think she's sort of laying out how each side felt without taking a side.
I think she puts it pretty strongly right at the beginning of the book in the prologue, where she has a quote from a former member of the royal household who says, "My sense from the beginning was that you had in Meghan someone who had no context through which to comprehend the institution. And in the palace, you had an institution that had no context for understanding Meghan. So you had this huge problem of two worlds colliding that had no previous experience of each other." And I think it's a good way of putting it, especially because, as we said, Tina puts in the work to understand where Meghan is coming from. And that it's not as simple as just saying, oh, well, Meghan wasn't used to it, so she was couldn't deal with it. And, that kind of narrative puts the emphasis on Meghan, I think, to learn more.
Yeah.
But, Tina goes out of her way to show that, it's very understandable that Meghan had the expectations that she did going into this.
And as well as that, she suggests that Camilla, Kate and Sophie Wessex could have made a similar declaration in support of Meghan as the female MPs who signed that letter after the documentary.
Yeah, which I think is a very good point.
I think some people, though, will be really scrutinising how Tina Brown talks about Meghan.
Yeah, and I do understand why. I get the feeling from the book, as we've said, that she has a great deal of sympathy for Meghan, and she does go to great lengths to get an understanding of the world that Meghan is coming from. But there were definitely times in it that I did feel a bit uncomfortable. I think we mentioned the word choices, she talks about the cable TV ghetto that Meghan was stuck in terms of her casting choices and things. But I think beyond just word choice, there was a kind of intense energy to the way that she writes about Meghan's career frustrations. And that energy is, I think, absent from her treatment of the other members of the royal family. I think part of that is obviously no other member of the family has had the kind of career that Meghan's had, or a comparable career. Like maybe the only one that's even slightly comparable is Sophie with her like work in PR. But even so, like I don't think it's anywhere near as intense.
No.
I could see though how people would read this energy, which sometimes is very positive and sometimes is like less flattering, as coming from a place of either bias or a kind of like more conscious dislike or something like that.
There was one moment that really gave me pause where she was talking about the moment early on in their relationship when Harry released the statement about the press treatment of Meghan, and she describes that statement as a quantum leap for Meghan. She says, she was now a global avatar of diversity and style, and on social media, something more potent still, a victim. In actual ugly fact, for sure, yet also imbued with the aura of a woman who could assert she'd been wronged. She absorbed her new identity ravenously.
Yeah, I didn't like this, to be honest. Like, I do see that she is acknowledging Meghan's use of image craft and branding and strategy, all the things that helped Meghan in her career up until that point. But I think it's taking it too far, personally, that Meghan would be, like, taking advantage of an image of victimhood.
Yeah, and I think the characterization of her doing so ravenously, that idea of gleefulness or greed, that seems to really be rooted in a racist bias.
Yeah.
And obviously you and I aren't in a position to adjudicate what kind of conscious or unconscious racist biases that Tina has in writing about Meghan. But I will say it did strike me that she was aware of that in other media. For, you know, just to give one example, she talked about how when that story on the front page of The Sun of the Harry's girl is on Pornhub, when somebody put a scene from Suits on Pornhub without Meghan's knowledge or consent, when that was put on the front page next to an image of Kate in a white gown, that was the tabloid's way of pitting the virtuous white Kate against, in Tina's words, the racially confounding Meghan. And, you know, it just seemed to me that she was aware of that aspect of it.
We should move on to the woman herself, who looms large over the whole of the book, really, the Queen.
Yeah, the Queen is a major presence throughout, and Tina is looking at her as a sovereign, as a wife, as a mother, as a grandmother, in many different roles.
Yeah.
And as we touched on when talking about Kate, her defining trait, particularly in her professional life, according to Tina, is her mystique. And it's this which is, according to Tina, the key to the Queen's success on the global political stage and also with the British people. Like, she talks about how the Queen has such an impassive face that people can read whatever they are feeling into it. Like, she gives an example of seeing the Queen at an orchestra performance or something, and that some people might be like, oh, the Queen is loving this, or they'll be like, oh, this is shit, look, even the Queen is hating it, because you're just, there's nothing there, so you can project whatever you want onto it.
Yeah, and like as we mentioned, Kate is the only one of the young royals who has even an element of this, and it is very impressive, like, to be able to do that today. Although, as Tina notes, Kate's approach to the blank slate is much less stony than the Queen's. She says, a resting stone face like Her Majesty's would not work for a modern royal duchess. Kate's chosen public expression is one of eternal joy. At climate change conferences, at Air Force bases, at canine training centres, it's smile, smile, smile.
Yeah, Tina obviously felt like she couldn't say the Queen has a resting bitch face, so we go with resting stone face instead.
Yeah, like, don't worry, message received. But I did feel like the book isn't particularly interested in any of the Queen's failures or mistakes in a professional capacity. Like, Tina makes it kind of clear that she thinks it's only the Queen's reaction to Diana's death that was something that she got wrong.
Yeah, that's sort of pinpointed as the only time the Queen got it wrong.
Yeah. And, I mean, that doesn't seem true to me at all, because, like, even just recently we've seen the way that she's, like, been protecting Andrew for the last 2 years. Like, not just at Philip's Memorial. I mean, like, when he was hiding in her house, like from legal papers, when she was like really dragging her heels on taking away the military titles and things. Like, it really hurt her reputation, I think. I think it was a mistake to leave it as long as she did. But you don't get anything about that in this book.
She does mention things like the Queen being happy to be pictured with Andrew, like, was it the day after Epstein was found dead that they were pictured going to church together? I think she mentions that in the book, and there's stuff like that. But yeah, she doesn't highlight it as this is a mistake.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's no mention of things like the Queen's secret lobbying of the government, which we obviously talk about frequently. But I wasn't surprised that that didn't make it in.
Yeah, like, this book isn't concerned with whether or not the monarchy should be there. It's only really concerned with how successful the royals are at preserving the existence of the monarchy by navigating like public relations and trying to neutralise the scandals which are often of their own making. Like, that's what Tina is interested in. She's not passing judgment on whether the monarchy should exist in the first place.
Yeah, and I did find it very interesting the way she talks about the Queen's distinction between her being sovereign and her being grandmother. And in particular, she compares the Queen to Logan Roy from Succession, which was so funny. Also, just in relation to that, she points out that, you know, we've heard so much about were Harry and Meghan, or was Harry upset that the picture of Harry and Meghan and Archie was removed from the Queen's desk during the Christmas message that was broadcast for 2019.
Oh, yeah.
And we always hear people being like, oh, well, you know, it was just about the direct line of succession and the heirs and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't a big deal. But Tina says that she heard that the Queen told the director of that broadcast to keep all of the framed photos in the shot except the one of Harry, Meghan and Archie, and that she said to the director, I suppose we don't need that one. And that even Will was appalled to see that Sussexes had been edited out because he knew how much that would upset Harry.
And that is a mistake.
Yeah.
You know, and if we're to believe this, it's a mistake that the Queen made. And, like, she has been Harry's grandmother for his whole life. She should know how he's going to react to things like that.
But I thought it was so interesting when she talked about how, you know, we've spoken before about how before Harry and Meghan posted the Instagram post about them stepping down, which is still so funny that was on Instagram, but that after they came back from Canada in the winter of 2019, that Harry had asked to meet the Queen multiple times in January, I think it was, and that they kept saying, oh, she got something in her diary. Oh, sorry, she's got something else going on. She can't meet with you. And Tina suggests that it was the Queen. You know, we had been led to believe that there were other people, maybe the men in grey suits type thing, putting up these obstacles between the Queen and Harry. But Tina says the Queen was refusing to meet him because she knew she'd be more likely to agree to his demands in person. And there's a palace source who says of the Queen, she famously says yes, she caves. So that the Queen knew that she probably wouldn't be able to resist giving Harry what he was asking for if they had met in person. So she was the one putting up the sovereign wall and playing the Queen role rather than the granny role.
Right, yeah.
Which was an interesting way of looking at it because, you know, usually we're told that, oh, the Queen and Harry have such a close bond and there was just all these other people getting in the way. But it sounds from this version of the story anyway that it was, as we had suspected, the Queen calling the shots.
Yeah, and, like, you know, it's a nice way to deflect blame if you can put employees in the way rather than saying, oh, it's me as your grandmother refusing to see you.
And I think it gives people, because, you know, I know there's so many people that think of the Queen as like the granny of the nation and they have this fondness for her. But to think about her as somebody who's able to compartmentalize like that and to put on her Queen hat and her granny hat at different times.
Yeah.
So she can, at moments, be very tender with Harry, and then at other moments, she can be very cold.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, about the Queen's mistakes and everything, like, even while this book was being finalised, there surely would have been discussions about whether or not the Queen was in danger of ruining the last few years of her reign, like either with the support for Andrew or, like we're saying, this kind of bad handling of Harry. Like, it is weird, I think, that the book doesn't really make any reference to damage the Queen might be doing to her legacy. especially in, like, she's in a situation now where there's, like, constant conversation over whether she's slowly handing power over to Charles unofficially, whether that's a strong or weak thing for her to do. There's conflicting messages coming from different households about the situation. Like, surely all of this is stuff that Tina would be really interested in, because it's exactly the kind of mad palace intrigue that clearly, like, excites her. And I wonder, I mean, this book is already 500 pages, not including the notes and stuff. So maybe there just isn't enough room, and also maybe it's, like, too soon to be able to get an angle on that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, and I would hope, that we'll get another Tina Brown book in 10 years or whatever when Charles is king.
Yeah.
And maybe that will look at the handover and those questions might be answered at that point. But I think one of the things she really doesn't shy away from is the Queen's personal life. And, you know, when you're talking about mistakes, she does talk about mistakes she's made in her relationship with Charles.
Yeah.
And to some extent, her weakness for Andrew. Like, with regard to Charles, I think a lot of people have heard this before, but the fact that she was quite detached and that she missed his second and third Christmases, his third birthday, that she took 2 6-week trips away from him to Malta to see Philip when Charles was only a year old.
Yeah. And I don't think she goes quite hard enough when she gets to Andrew. I think there's, like, a sense in that it's Andrew's deception and manipulation that are the problem. But as we have seen over the last while, like, the Queen chooses to ignore the advice of people around her when it comes to Andrew.
I thought it was so funny, the story about the Jubilee photograph, where it was decided it would be a slimmed down presence on the balcony for that photograph, and that they have a palace source saying that there are people literally restraining certain members of the family who were trying to get onto the balcony, which was surely Prince Andrew.
Yeah, you could easily imagine that.
I did think there was one anecdote that I found quite revealing about the Queen, which was about one of her corgis dying, and Pamela Hicks, who is a relative of the royal family, she's sort of a cousin of Prince Philip, Dickie Mountbatten's daughter, she sent the Queen a sympathy note, and she received a 6-page letter from the Queen in response. And this was particularly notable, Tina points out, because when Pamela's father, Earl Mountbatten, was murdered by the IRA, neither Pamela or her sister received any personal letters of condolence from the Queen.
Yeah, like, sort of a bit mind-boggling, but, like, Pamela puts it this way. She says, a dog isn't important, so she can express the really deep feelings she can't get out otherwise.
But Tina points out it's more likely that actually the opposite is true.
And that she just cares a lot more about dogs than she does people.
Which I thought was very illuminating. But in terms of people she does care about, the book spends a good portion of time on the relationship between the Queen and Philip and how their marriage worked.
Theirs was a bond that didn't need a constantly reinforced presence.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, they are of a very different generation to
Yeah.
us. And Tina's of a different generation to you and I as well. So I think that she'll have a different view on their relationship than we do. But I did think the passages about Philip and his chauffeur, Penny Natchbull, who we've talked about on the podcast before, were striking. Like, Tina quotes a palace figure who told Richard Kay of the Queen, she accepted that he took a lot of amusing. I've always felt his need for amusement outside his marriage had something to do with him being such an active and demanding consort, while having to take a back seat to his wife. But his loyalty to her is unquestioning. Tom, what do you think about this use of amusement? Like, that's got to be an innuendo, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like watching cartoons. Like,
my need for amusement. What a strange way to put it.
But through the relationship between the Queen and Philip, and reference as well to the Queen's parents, Tina demonstrates this theory she has that the monarch's spouse is key to the success of a ruler. In this example, Philip was the only person supposedly who could really talk truthfully without fear of reprisal to the Queen, and that really helped her to learn to make better decisions.
And that it emboldened her as well.
Yeah.
Like, Tina had said that if the Queen hadn't married Philip, she would probably be a lot more timid and easier to manoeuvre.
Yeah. But the way Tina talks about Philip, I think, is a pretty good way of understanding how she feels about the royals in general. Like, when we went to see her talking, she said, "Oh, I love Philip, he's such a character." And yet, the book doesn't shy away from his failures as a father to Charles, his probable infidelities, or the way his racist remarks were like constantly glossed over as just harmless jokes that didn't land, rather than constant hints at how he actually felt. And her love for these people, it seems, actually just reflects how interesting she finds them. And that means, you know, what she loves is complexity, contradiction, having a lot to dig into as somebody who likes researching and talking to people about these characters.
Yeah.
It's very different from the way I think royal fans love Kate or love Meghan. Like, that kind of love, the fan love where only positive comments are allowed, it does mean that you can't get as full and rounded a picture of the person who is like the object of your love.
Yeah, it's not idolizing.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But I thought we could maybe finish by talking about the book's strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
So I think coming after the Diana Chronicles, I was, especially because we read the Diana Chronicles quite recently, and I would say if you are going to read the Palace Papers, which I would highly recommend that you do if you're interested. We haven't even given away like all the stuff in this book. There's so much in it. But having read the Diana Chronicles, it started off slow, the Palace Papers, because she's covering a lot of the same ground. So you've, you know, read her writing and talking about these things before, but as it gets deeper into it, it's much richer and it's fresher because it's, well, stuff that I hadn't heard before or heard it quite in this way, in this, you know, what I felt is a more balanced and certainly a more funny and entertaining way. Yeah. Anyway, the Diana Chronicles, obviously, we've talked about it before, feels like the definitive book on Diana. And I think there definitely are parts of this book that feel like a definitive look at the royals in the 21st century.
Yeah, and I think there's a sense of having, like, everything that we've been talking about on this podcast for the last, 3 years, plus a lot more, obviously, drawn together into, like, one very well-structured, well-written book.
Yeah, and it's so enjoyable to read. And I know a lot of you guys pay very close attention to this stuff as well, so you know most of the stuff that happens. But her sort of sparkling prose and her sense of humor and all that stuff, it really works for me.
Yeah.
And I've read her Vanity Fair diaries as well, and all of her way of writing is so brisk and lively, and it makes you want to read more. It was like sometimes when we read books for this podcast, it's like, you know, with the Fergie book, for example, it's like, fuck, okay, we've got to finish this before we do the episode.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, I was like, oh man, I want to get back to read the next bit of the Tina Brown book.
Yeah. There's so many good bits in it, like, as we've been talking about, but like I really like the way she talks about royal entitlement, particularly in the behaviour of the men in the royal family. She writes like loads about Will's awful attitude as a kid.
Oh, God.
Like, the way that he would like threaten staff and make demands.
Yeah, apparently the Queen complained to Philip that as a child Will was out of control and needed a stricter nanny, and that apparently Will loved to say, when I'm king, I'm going to make a new rule that blah blah blah, which the Queen
really
didn't like. By the time he was 4 years old, he supposedly liked to tell his nanny, no one tells me what to do. When I'm king, I will have you punished.
Oh my God, little fucking tyrant.
Yeah.
But it's also so funny that the Queen's attitude to that, or answer to that, is we need a stricter nanny.
I mean, obviously, like, he was 4 years old. I probably was a nightmare when I was 4 as well. You can forgive him.
I definitely was, but yeah.
Okay, not a competition. But you can forgive his bad behaviour, I think. But even when he was 8, he would be doing things like stealing food off staff members' plates.
Yeah.
What a little brat.
Yeah, really bad.
I mean, 8, you're still a child. But, you know, that there was years and years of this kind of behaviour is very funny to me. I thought another particular success of the book was how much detail she went onto Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah.
And she had met both of them socially a few times, and I felt like those chapters were really good, particularly in terms of Andrew and Epstein's relationship. She says, privately Epstein told people that Andrew was an idiot, but to him a useful one. Epstein used to fly Andrew to obscure foreign markets where governments were obliged to receive him, and Epstein went along as his investment advisor. With Andrew as frontman, Epstein could negotiate deals with these often shady players and give Andrew some cream off the cake.
So interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we might have even talked about this on the podcast when the extracts came out, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, and her, like, story about how she was invited to Epstein's dinner for Andrew with Woody Allen and Katie Couric and everyone in New York.
Yeah, I love it. She retold that story when we saw her being interviewed, and the way she was like, once the Peggy, what's her name, invited her, when she was like, what is this, the fucking Predator's ball? It was so funny.
So funny, yeah.
Where she was saying, like, in the book, she was like, I'm so glad I never went to this dinner, which turned out to be one of the most notorious nights in New York society history. But when we saw her, she was kind of like, I sort of regret not going because I would have had, like, another chapter for this book.
Yeah.
And I sort of wish she had gone as well, because I'm sure that would have been a crazy story.
We've, like, never really talked that much about Andrew and Fergie's relationship because I guess it just seems like a bit, like, bonkers to me. I can't really get it.
But people always, like, say to us, like, what is the deal with Andrew and Fergie? What is the nature of their relationship? Are they together? Do they hate each other? Are they best friends? What's the deal?
And Tina goes into it a little bit and gives us some insight on what they're like as a divorced couple. She talks to friends of theirs saying that, like, Andrew's always been in love with her, never stopped loving her. But then there's also this story of him coming in when Fergie was being interviewed by an American media executive at Royal Lodge back in 2015. And he said, what are you doing talking to this fat cow?
Gross. So cruel.
Like, absolutely disgusting.
She says the media executive told her of Fergie, she has to sing for her supper. She's afraid of him.
Oof, kind of chilling.
Yeah, I do think their relationship is such an unusual one, but I thought it was interesting to hear that perspective on it. I think in terms of the other royal women,
I mean, I obviously hope that a major success of this book will be getting everyone on board with the prospect of sexy, lazy, boozy Queen Camilla in the future. I thought that her chapters on Camilla were really outstanding.
yeah, and I did think the chapters on Meghan were very exciting, and compared to the Andrew Morton book, it was a much more nuanced, compared to the Andrew Morton book and Finding Freedom, because I would say Finding Freedom was too schmaltzy, too saccharine for me. I don't think there's going to be a perfect account of Meghan.
Certainly not one written by, like, white British people from, like, the upper middle class or upper class, you know. Anyway, there were some, like, funny bits in it that we haven't covered as part of talking about the other stories. Like, I really love just, like, some of the stupid lines in it. Like, apparently a royal aide told Tina that when the Queen was visiting Ireland on that very successful tour she had in Ireland, but when she was in Cork, that people mobbed her like Beyonce, which I thought was so funny. This, like, royal aide being like, oh, they're treating her like she's Beyonce. Yeah. Like, get a grip yourself.
I also thought it was funny when she referred to Pippa Middleton's epic ass. And I loved the story about Kate's bachelorette party where she did karaoke to Cheryl Cole's Fight for This Love.
So
And
good.
Tina quotes the lyrics of Fight for This Love. Amazing.
Yeah, like it's a Shakespeare sonnet.
It's incredible. And then, of course, our mutual favourite story.
Yeah. So this is after Andrew and Fergie's divorce. Andrew went to stay with the former US ambassador for the UK in his house. And apparently he spent 2 days holed up in his room watching porn.
So disgusting.
How revolting.
It was so funny. It was like the wife of the former US ambassador was appalled. I'm like, well, yeah. I feel like I would tell literally every person I ever met this story if that had happened to me.
Oh my god. So funny because, like, we were both reading this book separately and I feel like we could probably both pinpoint the moment each of us read that bit just from how much we were laughing and screaming.
Then in terms of weaknesses or failures, I loved reading the book, but I'm, after finishing it, still not clear why we needed this book right now.
Yeah, like we were saying, the big upsets to royal life that have come in recent years are still playing out. So it means that the book does feel unfinished and some of her conclusions feel premature. Like, in particular, one that really stood out was she describes the Queen's last favour to Andrew being giving him the money for his settlement with Virginia Roberts Frey. But since then, we've seen her have him front and centre at Philip's memorial. And, like, you know, I'm pretty sure this would have happened after the book went to print and everything. Like, there's nothing Tina could do, but like, because this is still such an ongoing situation, they should have waited, I think.
I mean, I don't even know what they could wait for. I feel like they couldn't have known what was going to happen with Harry and Meghan or how big the Andrew stuff was going to get.
Yeah.
Because, you know, until the Newsnight interview, it wasn't big.
Yeah.
And I feel like the book that maybe you would have planned in summer 2019 could have ended with the happy birth of Archie and that everything now is looking sunny for the royals again.
Yeah.
And that is a very different ending to what happens here. And I think, you know, she makes some very interesting points about Harry and Meghan's various commercial deals and the need for them to deliver on them in a way that's quite different from the usual royal projects. But that whole situation is still quite up in the air, and it's too early to properly comment on or judge, because obviously we've just seen that Netflix cancelled Meghan's first project for them, the animated series Pearl. As Tina pointed out at the interview last week, that one of the quotes was like, well, you know, she's an actress. This isn't the first time she's been told no.
Yeah, which is something that just wouldn't be applied to royals in the UK. Like, if a royal has a project going on with someone, I don't think it gets cancelled.
Yeah, and she was like, wow, that's a long way from HRH, the Duchess of Sussex.
Yeah.
And I guess I just kind of want Tina Brown to be writing about this stuff all the time, because I want to know her insider insights on all of this stuff.
And, like, you know, this stuff with Meghan, it's not a case of, like, and now we need to pick apart why Harry and Meghan will be terrible at all this stuff.
No.
And I know that's not what you're saying, but, like, the fact is, and what Tina is saying, is that, like, they're now operating in the real world where projects fall through, so other projects go forward, and you have to kind of manage expectations, and you have to deal with budgets and all these kind of things that, like, maybe Harry, for example, wouldn't have had to really worry about in his work before.
Yeah, and I think, just like you were saying, it's too soon to gauge the success of their move yet, even though I'm sure lots of you are probably saying, well, it doesn't matter because it was necessary for them from a mental health and happiness point of view, which I'm not disagreeing with.
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely agree with that. But, you know, the rest of it, we kind of need to see play out a bit. It's clear that these kind of scandals, you know, with Andrew and the Sussex move had to be included, because there's really no way I think you could write a book about the royals right now, not include those things and expect people to buy it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's such an appetite for this stuff that even though I feel like the timing isn't right, I'm still glad to have it.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sure we will be talking about, like, I took like 15 pages of notes or something, so I'm sure we'll be talking about bits of this book for months to come. But I think that about does it for
Yeah, and
today.
I would just say, if you have enjoyed hearing us talk about it and haven't read it yet, or even if you found yourself really disagreeing with some of the things that were coming out of the book, I would really urge you to read it, because it's an entertaining read, and I think it really benefits from, like, that long format and getting to see what she does over the course of 500 pages with these 4 women, their lives, their relationships, and the kind of complex pictures that she's looking to build up. Even if you don't agree with all of the conclusions that she takes from it or all of the things that she's saying, like, I think it's a very impressive piece of work.
Agreed.
I think we'll wrap the episode up now because we've been going on for ages. But thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, we'll probably be back in a couple of weeks to talk about the Jubilee.
Oh, of course, that's creeping up on us.
As we know, Harry and Meghan and Archie and Lily will be coming back for that, which is very exciting. I can't wait to find out how much or little of them we are going to see.
Yeah.
We'll probably do some kind of preview of the Jubilee. We definitely have lots to say about the platinum pudding.
Oh, yeah, can't wait to talk about that. I think Red Hot Chili Peppers are playing as well, so, we might get a chance to see them.
For the youth concert.
Yeah, so funny. Oh my God.
Anyway, we'll talk about that next time. And if there's anything else you guys want to hear about, please let us know. And thank you so much for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Cringe de la cringe.